Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vic. I'm just so pleased to be here.
I'm excited to have you on. I said I was going to have, for the listeners, I was actually on Catherine's podcast and I told her, and I wanted to hold to my word. I said I would eventually, once things get kind of situated with the mindful experiment and how we were changing things a little, I was going to have you on. So for that episode, you can tune into the show notes. It's there. But Catherine, thanks for coming on. I'm excited to see where this conversation takes us I think we're going to be talking about some great things. And before we get into that, I want to, for the listeners, can you just share your story, how you got to what you're doing today? What kind of led you to that path?
I've had a kind of a windy road to where I am now. I think, as we often do. Right at the very beginning, when I was very young, I was actually brought up by two people who'd both sort of escaped from what everybody expected them to do. And they brought us up in a very alternative way. And we were actually encouraged to be conscious and inquiring and individual and all that kind of thing, which was massively helpful. And then since then, of course, I discovered that in the real world, if you really don't fit in, sometimes that can be a bit miserable, as well as being really magnificent. So I had all sorts of experiences around that as I went through childhood and adolescence and adulthood and so on. And there came a point, probably in my 20s, when I did the most extraordinary one of these intense weekend things where you really explore yourself, etc. And I thought, hey, I could actually work with people, helping them be more conscious and fulfilled and actually get paid for it. I could do that. And my path from there was finding ways to do that and evolving and growing with that ever since. And now, kind of 40 odd years later, how I'm doing it is very different from how I did it then, because I've learned a lot. But that's really been the thread. I think you can see the thread running through all the way from when I could talk, has led to me where I am now.
I love that. It's such a great upbringing to have, that be able to express your consciousness and do that as a kid to, in today's society, at least here in the States, it's all about just here's there, you go to school, you do this is what you do, you follow the rules, you follow authority, you do this, you go and it's like instead, and there is a movement happening where it's like, kids need to be express themselves and however they want, let them choose their interest, let them be their own self. And I'm loving seeing that movement because that's kind of leading to let them to be themselves. And it's something that as having a 10-month-old, we work along that path. And it's I love to hear that you said, yeah, it has served me very well later in life. And that's kind of like the goal of why we do what we do, so that we can give them the tools that I may have not got, I didn't get growing up in my upbringing, and neither did my wife in some ways, to do that, which I think is great. And I love the aspect of consciousness you talk about, because I think that's really where change happens. Would you agree?
Absolutely right. I was saying to someone the other day, to me, consciousness is like the big on switch for us. That's where everything comes from.
So can you explain, just to share for the listeners, what consciousness is? Not a loaded question.
Yeah. Just a little warm-up question there, Vic. Thank you very much.
I go right into things, I know.
The man with no fear. Consciousness is the thing for a person that is behind everything else. So all of the way that we think, the way that we feel, the way we behave, our psychology, our habits, our conditioning, all of those things are like layered on top of our consciousness. And our consciousness is you can think of consciousness on two levels, I think. You can think of it on a very pure level, where you're talking about pure consciousness, connection with universal energy, the source, that kind of level of consciousness. And then there's another kind of level of consciousness, which is much more around what we're aware of and how we're perceiving in the moment in our lives. And the two things, of course, are utterly connected, but one of them is connected to everything, and the other one is just connected to us as an individual. And the dialogue between those two things is a major theme for most people in their lives.
I love how you shared that. I wanted to ask you that question when it came up, because I actually had that happen to me on a podcast one day. I was talking about consciousness, and they're like, So tell me, what is conscience? I was like, wow, that's a loaded question. I'm like, let me formulate my thought here real quick.
Yes.
But no, I love how you shared it, because there is that essence of pureness, right? That level of just all is connected, that true essence of who we are. But then there's that other side where I kind of like to call it like consciously living, where we're allowing to observe and take in and process and choose and all those kind of things, rather than react like we do in today's world most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Or try to control things,
Mm,
because the pure consciousness has no interest in trying to control anything, because pure consciousness is, it exists because it exists because it exists, and it's absolutely fine as it is. And it's only our individual consciousness that wants to control things or please people, and all that kind of thing. So, but of course, in life, we need to sometimes control things. We need to make things happen and manage things, and that's important. So part of the dance is between that identity and that experience, and then the other one of kind of being immersed in that kind of bliss of universal consciousness.
I love that. I love how you share that. Yeah, and I think there is a dance to it. And I think there are times where, in that control, or I need to take action or something along that nature, compared to the other end of that. But how do individuals, how can they shift their consciousness in some way, shape, or form to lead more towards that path of fulfillment and those kind of things?
Well, I have a number of things that I do in my life, and sometimes I'll do something I've never done before just to find out. I would say the most, and this doesn't appeal to everybody, but the most powerful thing I'm aware of at the moment for shifting consciousness is an energy technique called Pellowa. Have you heard of it?
No, please go dive deeper.
Pellowah.
Oh,
Came out of Australia about 15 years ago. And, it was channeled, like people channel these energy techniques in dreams and meditation and vision. And it's basically a hands-off treatment that puts the recipient directly in touch with source. And so the recipient's consciousness and the source energy kind of have a dialogue about what does that person need, and that is what's then delivered. And the upshot is Pellowa means radical shift in consciousness. And it's very, very powerful, and it's very effective. And it's very mysterious, because when you experience it as a recipient, you've got no idea what's going to happen, because you're only aware of part of your consciousness. So what you think you need may not be what you really need. So it requires a degree of openness to surrender to that and just see what happens. And as a practitioner, I'm actually a teacher of this modality now, but I was a practitioner before that for years. And as a practitioner, you literally don't know what's going on with your client. You're literally holding space for this thing. So it's a very, very beyond ego practice. So that's why it doesn't appeal to everybody. But it's kind of growing now in the UK. It's very big in Australia. It's grown a lot in the UK, and it's starting to happen in the US. So that's very, very direct. And then kind of less direct than that, there's a whole series of meditation practices. I did this beautiful practice yesterday. You'll have heard of yoga nidra.
oh, yes.
Yeah. So I've only recently started engaging with yoga nidra, and there's a particular meditation somebody gave me. It's a 45-minute long guided meditation, and it takes you into a whole journey into your body, into the chakras, into choosing a resolution, imagining yourself hot, cold, happy, sad. It's an extraordinary kind of workout for the consciousness. And I came out of it feeling really happy. It's like I was just really, really happy. My consciousness had completely shifted because it had gone through this kind of workout, a bit like when you go to the gym and you come back and you're kind of glowing with endorphins. So it was almost like I was full of consciousness endorphins in that moment. And then, of course, there are talk work situations that people can do where they're working with a coach or a facilitator who keeps directing that person back to observing their own consciousness and to reflecting on that and noticing any judgments they have around it or censoring they have around it, and letting go of that and keeping returning to what am I experiencing? What is going on? And how does that liberate me? And how does that allow my consciousness to just move and shift and dance in the way that it wants to? And the final one I'll mention is, of course, conscious dance, which is a fantastic way to shift our consciousness when we just let go of steps, trying to look good. Are they looking at me? Are they judging me? Let go of all of that and just let the body move freely. That's another fantastic way to shift consciousness. See, you can see I've explored all sorts of things, all of which I found just very enjoyable and very empowering.
Well, I love how thank you for sharing the different tools to that, because it's one of the things where there's so many different angles. And I think the more you have, they all work in some way. And I think they're also, when you get into that realm more, at least I know for me, it's been like this, where sometimes I may need the first one. Sometimes I need, what you call it, conscious dance. So I've heard it as like, oh man, not trance dance. What's it called? Anyhow, ecstatic dance.
Yeah.
Static dance, yeah. Where you just let be free. You hear music and you just let your body do whatever it wants to do.
Exactly.
And it's so great to get out of the mind. And I remember when I first got exposed to that, like 12, 13 years ago, 14 years ago now, I was like, everybody watching, what's going on? And I was just like, man, when I was in high school, I used to love going to the clubs and just dance my heart out. And I was like, here's what people think. Let's do it here. And I just did. And it was like so freeing. So crazy how that works. But
I know.
Right. It's like at first you're like, I don't know. Do I want to move? And then as you get into it, you're just like, and then by the time you're done, you're just like, yeah, whatever. And you're just letting your body go.
What was the problem? What were you?
Yeah, right. It's like
I had someone come to one of my conscious dance sessions the other day, and before she came, she'd never done anything like it at all. And at the beginning, she was obviously a little bit self-conscious. And I saw her during the thing gradually let go. And at the end, we sat in a circle, and she said, I got it. I've got it. I've got it. And she was like shining, because she just completely let go of her own self-limitations in that moment.
I love that. And it's so amazing, because I think sometimes, and I think majority of us, for some way, shape, or form, we have dams to the flow of that consciousness that wants to be expressed, that wants to be out there. But yet at the same token, we're our mind, our layering, our constructs, and all these different things, we build them up to resist that.
Yeah.
And I love how you brought up too with the work you do. I'm definitely going to check that stuff out, where I know my experience in energy healing from learning it and then having it on me and doing it. It is so, you have to step out of ego in so many ways. Cause for a client I was doing this for, and I always tell my clients, when I'm going to do something like this, I'm like, I have no idea what any of this stuff means. So just understand, whatever I'm going to bring to you, what I find, there's no value to me whatsoever. So I'm just letting you know. And it may seem way out there for you too, if you don't understand it at first, but I was like, just sit with it, meditate with it. Here's things we can do, and things will come. And it always fascinates me. I'll share something and they'll be going, how do you know that? And I'm like, I don't know anything. Like age 5, this happened in this event, and it's related to dad, some sort of an argument. I don't know any of this. And they're just going, OMG. And I'm just like, I love that experience. And I'm like, yeah, this is so cool, because I can access something, and yet I have no understanding to what that is. I don't even know how this all works, but yet I know how to utilize it. And it's so amazing.
You're channeling. Yeah. You're channeling something in that moment.
Yeah. And there's ways I can use my left brain to work with me to help me find it, so that even though I feel it, I can go, let me just double check to make sure that is what I'm picking up on.
Yeah.
And I know you relate to this so well, but everyone, it's just the beauty of these different tools that we can use to get out of our way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, then the thing is, we do that. Let's say the person who had the ecstatic, the consciousness dance, and all of a sudden they're feeling free, they're feeling like that. That's great. But how do we support? What are some tools that you usually recommend, or things you use for yourself that can kind of support that individual through that journey to continue on and process, to keep the dam free, if you want to call it that way?
That's right. So the first thing I always say to people is really look after your body, really stretch, hot bath, have more salt than you think you need, hydrate, um, all of that, very, very important. A second thing is be aware that when you go home, there may be people there who don't understand what you've just experienced. So take care of yourself around that. You decide how much you're going to share, and you decide why you're sharing it. You are not beholden to share it with whoever is at home. Because some people think they're supposed to share every detail with the people at home, and that's not really the point. And sometimes that's very unhelpful for the person. So that's very important. And I'll tend to recommend to people keep doing it. Try and find a practice around this that fits in your lifestyle, that is just a thing that you just drop into. So you're not consciously having to make the decision again to go along. So you go, right, if I do that Saturday mornings, that's decided. Somebody's going to look after the dogs or whatever it is, or the kids every Saturday morning. It's arranged. So I don't have to every Friday be going, oh God, should I go tomorrow? Should I or shouldn't I? Can I arrange someone to take care of things? Make it easy, make it into an easy thing in your life. Some people like to read about it. Some people like to actually get hold of books and read about the whole conscious dance experience. For me, that's of no interest personally. But for some people, it's very interesting because it helps them to bridge the experience back to their conscious, mental, rational mind. And for some people, that's very comforting. It actually helps them to release into it. And for some people, that's irrelevant. So each person has their own kind of process to make something more accessible for themselves so that they can continue to nourish themselves with it.
I love it. And the thing that I'm picking up from the message is I'm always about is just find what works for you at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I mean, there's so many times we get so caught up like, oh, we do this. Okay, how many times do I have to do this? What's the repetition I have to do? How do I follow, this and that? Or like some people, I'm the type of person where if I do something and I'm like, wow, that was awesome. That's amazing. Then my left brain science mind comes in and goes, okay, how does that work? I just want to know. I'm curious. Like, and sometimes I can get those answers and sometimes you can't. And it's just like, that's fine, but I'm just curious. I just want to learn so I can understand it at a deeper level.
Yeah.
But I think coming back to it's in this kind of work, it's really just finding your path and what works for you.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Now, let's talk a little bit about fulfillment. I know that came up earlier when you were talking, and I think that term is just something that I'm a big fan of. I use that term a lot in what I do. One, how do you define fulfillment?
No one's ever asked me that. The word fill that's in the middle of fulfillment is part of the answer, because when we're fulfilled, we are full of the experience that we want. It's like after a good meal, we are full and we're full of beautiful nourishment. And when we're fulfilled, we're full of that beautiful feeling that we want. So I think fill in the middle of fulfilled is a big part of what it actually means. And I've only thought of that now in this conversation. So we know when we're fulfilled, when we are no longer comparing ourselves to other people, anxious about whether we're going to fail or not, criticizing ourselves for mistakes we've made, desperate for sugar, chocolate, coffee, alcohol, weed, whatever our thing is. We're not in a state of lack. We're in a state of like grounded centeredness, and we feel like we are enough. And the experience we're having is enough. And we're filled with that feeling.
I love that. I think, when you were sharing the word full and fill and this, I was like, consciousness, soul's purpose, expressing your essence of who you really are and letting it just embody you. And that's where then you brought it. Then you kept going with the lack and this. I'm like, I'm like, I may have to change my definition around a little bit on that one.
Well, I think those things that you just mentioned are like the most direct route to fulfillment when you connect with those things that you mentioned. So those are like the path, I think, to fulfillment. Because when we are fulfilled, we don't really care how we got there. We're just fulfilled.
I think of it like a 3-4-year-old kid. They're just happy in that moment. They're the true essence, in my opinion, at that age range, because Left brain is starting to develop, but not logic's not there yet enough.
Yeah.
And so they still have a very strong, prominent right brain. So like they just do what they love and they don't care about whatever. It's just in the moment, they love it and they just keep doing it. And it's just a
Yeah.
joy for them.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the imagery I get when it comes to the level of like what really is that embodiment of fulfillment and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay,
Yeah.
so we you mentioned a little bit. I shared about the path to fulfillment when I was sharing that point. What are some tips that you share, or you can help, or you can share your own story of how to get onto that path? And I know we kind of maybe have talked about this already a little bit, but how to find that path to fulfillment? Because I really believe in today's society, is that mental health is just tanking, and I think people are not truly living or following their true path of what's for them to lead to the path to fulfillment.
Yes. And I think that the most powerful way to do it is to start with finding our questions. So, whatever that question is, whether the question is, why am I not fulfilled? Or what is fulfillment for me? Or where am I fulfilled in my life? Where am I not? Or how am I going to pay the bills this month? Whatever the most presenting questions are, to get clear about those and to trust ourselves to use those as a guide for our own path to fulfillment. Because I think for me, that's actually how I've come to a place of fulfillment, because those questions always lead me into what's the thing I'm going to try, you know, but what's the thing someone else tried? What's the thing that doesn't work for me? What's the thing that appeals to me? So to trust ourselves, to find our own questions and to use those as our guide, and then to trust whatever we find when we answer those questions. And then maybe we have another question, or maybe we have an answer. Then there are always more questions and always more answers. And that's then a path. And along the way, we find ourselves finding all of these things we've talked about: conscious dance, energy work, conscious coaching work, meditation, rest, lying on the beach, reading an incredible book, whatever it is that person needs in that moment. And we learn as we go, because we make mistakes and we go, oh, I was wrong about trying that thing. So what does that tell me? So maybe this thing over here, so I think trusting oneself and trusting one's own direction around the exploration, I think, is the most important thing.
I couldn't agree more. It's again, coming back to that 3-4-year-old, just exploring, right? Explore with the questions, see where the answers lead you. There'll be more questions that will come. It'll help you dive deeper. And I love the question side, because it gives you that introspect to go within, which I think a lot of us are always looking outside for the answers, asking others or asking mentors. And there's nothing wrong with asking mentors or something, but or following something instead of, hold up, but what does this all mean for me? Why this? Why do I have this? Or what is showing up here? And going down that path. And that will kind of lead to then, like you're sharing. I love it. Great stuff. So, Catherine, before we go, how can people find you, follow the work you're doing, and all the amazing things that you're up to?
Thank you. I think the best place for people to go is my podcast that you're familiar with. It's called Truth and Transcendence. And as you know, the idea is that when we find and connect with our truth, we can then transcend. And there's a whole range of very, very different conversations on this podcast, and little short solo episodes with just me. Sometimes I'm recommending a book. Sometimes I'm just sharing about something individual, and these wonderful guest appearances as well. So it's a very rich podcast, and I highly invite people to come and listen to that. And then in the show notes, there's always some links and things that people can go to find me.
Awesome. And I highly recommend the podcast. It is a great podcast. I love it. And there's a great episode of me on there. So I highly recommend checking that out. But no, definitely check out the podcast, guys. I'll have all that in the show notes. Again, when I first met you, Catherine, I loved your energy, and I was like, this is someone I can definitely connect with. So check that stuff out. Catherine, thank you so much for all the work you do for humanity. And all that is so much needed. And I just appreciate somebody you're doing that deep rooted stuff that really makes the true shifts in people's lives. So just thank you for doing the work and following that path.
Thank you so much, Vic. And same to you.
Awesome. Let me